Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're embarking on quite a reflective journey, I think. We're delving into a really fascinating set of personal notes that explore this concept the author calls counterforce. Now, this isn't presented as some kind of final polished theory. It's more a collection of evolving insights,
Right.
born from lived experience. And honestly, that's what makes it so compelling, I find, so relatable. We should probably acknowledge upfront that the material we'll be discussing does touch on some sensitive stuff, potentially challenging psychological dynamics. It really explores how a person confronts resistance, whether that's internal or external, what these notes describe as threat, suffering, or conflict. It's about those moments, when something just seems to go directly against what you're trying to create or change or realize. So our mission today is to unpack these reflections, try to extract the key nuggets of understanding, and maybe gain some insights into navigating those moments when resistance, well, inevitably shows up. Think of it as maybe a guide to understanding the subtle signals our own psyche might be sending us. Okay, so let's begin to unpack this. Let's start right at the core question. What exactly is this counterforce? The notes describe it as any psychic or energetic resistance that emerges precisely when a person is about to create something, change something, realize something significant. It doesn't just appear out of the blue, it seems. It feels tied to those moments of transition or real intentional effort. And initially, it often manifests internally, right? Maybe as just a vague unease or a flicker of doubt.
That's a crucial starting point, yeah. And what's particularly insightful, maybe even a bit unsettling, is how this internal resistance can then subtly, sometimes almost uncannily, express itself externally. The notes give some pretty vivid examples, like a loud argument suddenly erupting nearby just when you're trying to focus on something creative.
Oh, okay.
Or, an unexpected technical failure right when you absolutely need that tool to work. Or a sudden delay messing up your plans.
Right.
Even a direct rejection of an idea you felt really passionate about.
So it's not just that these bad things happen to you randomly, but they can almost feel like a direct echo of what's going on inside.
Precisely. That's the key insight here. The notes highlight that these aren't necessarily just random events. They can become symbolic mirrors of that internal resistance. But it depends heavily on, your own inner narratives, how you interpret these external frictions or triggers. So if you're feeling this deep internal doubt about a project, and then boom, your computer crashes, well, it's easy for the mind to connect those two, right? It makes the external event feel like it's validating that internal resistance, almost as if the outside world is reflecting something unacknowledged inside us.
Okay, that's interesting, because traditionally, when we face obstacles like that, we're sort of taught to see them as purely a block, aren't we? An adversary, something to just grit your teeth and push through.
Exactly. That's the default mode for many of us.
But here's where it gets really interesting. These notes, they start to shift that interpretation quite dramatically. They suggest counterforce might not be something to combat at all.
Indeed. Yeah, the author proposes that counterforce might actually be a kind of signpost, almost like an alarm system.
An alarm?
Yeah, it's seen as a potentially helpful mechanism, maybe even an evolutionary alarm or a deep internal guide, as the notes put it. Its purpose isn't necessarily to stop you, but rather to reveal misalignment before you proceed further down a path.
Okay, like a warning light on a dashboard. Sort of, yeah. Think of it like a finely tuned sensor, designed maybe to optimize your psycho-emotional system. And the notes even observe that in states of absolute harmony, or what people often call flow.
Right, flow states.
Yeah, where there's no internal friction, no conflict. Counterforce just doesn't seem to appear, it's absent.
Wow, that's a profound thought. So, if I'm getting this right, the absence of counterforce might actually be a powerful indicator that you're truly aligned, that you're on the right track for you.
It certainly suggests a deep connection between our inner state and how we perceive or even generate external resistance. If your intention is, let's say, pure, clear, unconflicted, then the system, both inside and maybe even outside, seems to have no reason to generate this corrective feedback. It implies that true alignment reduces that internal friction so much that external resistance either doesn't appear or maybe we just don't perceive it as resistance anymore.
Okay, so if counterforce is a guide, then the obvious next question is, what's it trying to tell us? What does it actually mean when we encounter it? Well, the notes expand on this quite a bit. They suggest that counterforce may signal that the original force, and by that the notes mean your initial intention, your desire, your motivation, isn't fully coherent or authentic.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a call to pause and really examine what's driving you. It could indicate several crucial things. For instance, maybe a better path or a more effective way forward is actually available to you, one you just haven't seen yet.
Hmm.
Or perhaps there's another hidden desire lurking under the surface somewhere, one that's actually in conflict with your stated goal.
So it's not just that the path itself is wrong, but that my own desire for that path might be fragmented or incomplete somehow.
Exactly. It's a great way to put it. Or it could simply be that the chosen direction, even if it looks logical or desirable on the surface, isn't deeply aligned with your deeper truth, your authentic self. And this raises a really important question. What if we stopped interacting with Counterforce like it's an enemy we have to beat? The notes suggest using it more like a symptom, an indicator perhaps that one isn't fully embracing their true inner light, so to speak. Essentially, it's an invitation to pause, look inward, and really check the authenticity and the coherence of our intentions before just blindly pushing forward. And looking even broader, Note 254 frames Counterforce as almost a systemic thing, what the author calls a cosmic homeostatic mechanism.
Okay, homeostatic, like balance seeking.
Exactly. Think of how your body maintains its temperature, right? Or how an ecosystem regulates itself after a fire or something. It's that fundamental drive towards equilibrium and balance, but applied not just to biology, but to our inner world, and maybe even beyond. It suggests that any significant deviation from equilibrium within complex systems naturally generates a kind of corrective force working to restore balance. And this applies to our personal psyche just as much as it might apply to a larger natural system.
That's a fascinating principle, almost universal. So, okay, if it signals misalignment, how do we move beyond it? Or maybe even dissolve it? The notes suggest that real inner clarity and strength can actually make Counterforce disappear. That sounds, well, almost too simple.
It does sound simple, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's probably profoundly challenging in practice. The notes explain that when the original desire is truly powerful and coherent and integrated meaning, like all parts of your being are aligned with it, then the notes say there's simply no room left for alternative configurations. There are no internal conflicts to project outward. In that kind of state, Counterforce just dissolves. It vanishes. The author even talks about elevated forces. These are described as intentions that sort of transcend the individual ego. They align with a greater purpose or maybe a universal truth. And these, the notes contend, don't generate Counterforce because they operate from a place of complete internal alignment, a kind of selfless direction.
That's a beautiful concept, moving beyond just the personal ego. But, okay, if we're not always operating at that elevated level, which, let's face it, is most of us most of the time,
Right.
the notes still offer a really personal, practical approach for navigating this internal friction. They call it sombra. Can we dig into that? What does that mean for actually feeling and moving through this resistance?
Yes, the sombra method, which is described in Note 256, it's quite a different approach. It's far less about rational analysis,
Yeah.
Thinking your way through it, and much more about directly engaging with the emotional core of the discomfort, the pain that Counterforce might bring up.
Engaging with the pain.
Yeah. It's described as a fusion with the pain, or the discomfort itself, often aided by music, interestingly. The idea is you don't seek to escape it or repress it or even understand it intellectually. Instead, you try to unite completely with the emotion, to become one with the Counterforce almost, to look with its eyes, as the notes put it.
Wow. That sounds incredibly counterintuitive. Our usual instinct is to run from discomfort.
Right.
Avoid it at all costs.
Exactly. Usually try to fix it or push it away.
So what's the supposed outcome of this full immersion?
Well, the idea is that through this complete unresisted immersion, you access a deeper kind of emotional clarity. And what the author calls an unconscious discourse. This apparently leads to a profound clarity that doesn't require intellectual effort. Imagine you're stuck on a problem. Your mind's just racing, going in circles. Instead of pushing harder intellectually, you lean into the discomfort. Maybe put on some music that resonates with the feeling. You allow that deeper intuitive part of you to maybe surface the answer or the shift needed.
So it's like finding a solution not through logic, but through surrender.
Kind of, yeah. Maybe like a purging process, where the inner truth expresses itself without the usual filters of intellectualizing or resistance. It's a way to let your own inner wisdom speak, perhaps.
That's fascinating. And it's interesting how these reflections on Counterforce and Sombra seem to connect to broader observations the author makes about flow, resistance, the nature of desire. It feels like they offer a framework for understanding why sometimes our efforts just seem to click and other times it's just constant friction.
Absolutely. The notes offer several really compelling observations that feel almost like I don't know, universal laws of intention or something. For instance, Note 257 has this insight. If you're truly detached from what you're doing.
Detached meaning you don't care.
Not necessarily don't care, more like.
Yeah.
Engaged, but not intensely grasping or desperate for one specific outcome. You're invested, but open. When you're in that state, things tend to flow much more easily. But if you desire something with too much intensity, too much attachment, that neediness, that's often precisely when things get interrupted, when counterforce shows up.
Ah, the paradox of trying too hard.
Exactly. And critically, the notes also state that if you act primarily from a desire to avoid something like avoiding an emotional state or a perceived failure or even just discomfort, then basically nothing seems to work properly. It really highlights its delicate balance between intention, attachment, and the final outcome.
I can definitely relate to that feeling. When things just seize up because you're clinging too tightly to an outcome or, yeah, when you're just trying to outrun a feeling. So real progress isn't about forcing some ideal future state.
According to Note 258, no. It suggests real progress comes not from trying to push or pull yourself towards some ideal future, but actually from uniting with what is present right now. Especially those difficult emotions or unexpressed feelings you might be trying to avoid. The author apparently describes trying for a long time to move from the present to an ideal place, self-development efforts, but without positive results. And it's in that space of presence, without the constant pressure of an ideal, without the force of aspiration. That's where one's true light is said to emerge. And this isn't some idealized, externally prescribed light. It's one that arises from, and I quote, one's own darkness, one's own rhythm, and one's unique tones.
Finding your light in your own darkness, that's powerful.
It's about authenticity rather than aspiration, really.
And that connects back to detachment, which can also sound counterintuitive when we talk about having desires.
Right. And this is reinforced in Note 259. It says when a state of real detachment is achieved, meaning the desired outcome might happen, it might not, but you remain centered and internally balanced regardless.
Okay.
Then paradoxically, the desired outcome often appears almost inevitably, sometimes with surprisingly little effort. It's that letting go that allows it to come in.
The paradox of intention again.
Exactly. And crucially, Note 260 drives this home. It states that if there isn't a genuinely real desire, an authentic inner pull, any model or strategy you try to implement will ultimately self-sabotage. Because, as the author puts it, the mind does not want to sustain something that does not belong to it. It underscores just how important authentic inner motivation and coherence really are. Your system rejects what isn't truly yours.
Okay, so pulling this all together, if we understand counterforce, we acknowledge its signals, we work with our internal state by embracing authenticity, cultivating this healthy detachment. How does all of this translate into a practical, strategic mindset for actually navigating life's challenges day to day?
Well, Note 261 offers a really crucial strategic insight here. Very grounded, I think, in real-world application. It suggests that resolving counterforce, or what the author also calls the shadow, the unacknowledged or difficult parts of ourselves that contribute to that internal resistance, it involves having an internal fallback plan.
A fallback plan, like a plan B.
Exactly. But conceived internally, strategically. It's not about giving up hope on plan A, but about building resilience. The notes compare it to a military strategy, having a planned retreat. It's exemplified by the thought, okay, if X doesn't happen, then I will do Y.
That sounds incredibly pragmatic. Less about wishful thinking or manifesting, and more about solid mental preparedness.
Absolutely. So if my big desire, my plan A, doesn't work out for whatever reason, I already have a plan in place to pivot gracefully.
Right.
And this simple strategic step ensures that if that primary desire fails or gets thwarted, your integrity and coherence can still be preserved. That's the key phrase. It helps prevent that psychic collapse, that feeling of utter devastation that can happen when your entire sense of self-worth gets tied to one single outcome.
Which happens all too easily.
It does. So this fallback plan, it's like inoculating yourself against that devastation. It helps you maintain your inner balance regardless of the external results. It creates this internal sense of security, which actually frees you from that suffocating pressure of this absolutely has to work.
And paradoxically, that might even make plan A more likely to succeed.
It very well might. It allows you to pursue your desires with genuine enthusiasm, but without that desperate edge, knowing your well-being isn't solely dependent on this one specific path working out.
Wow, okay. Our deep dive into these personal notes on counterforce. It really has taken us on quite a journey, hasn't it? From viewing resistance as just this annoying obstacle to potentially seeing it as a profound internal guide.
It's a significant shift in perspective.
Yeah. We've explored how that external friction can be maybe a symbolic echo of our inner dynamics, and how understanding these signals might lead to greater clarity, deeper authenticity, and maybe even a unique form of personal power. The ideas here, I think, are a powerful reminder that true strength often lies not in fighting against what emerges,
Hmm.
but maybe in understanding its message and aligning ourselves with a deeper, more coherent desire within us. And it's important to remember, these aren't presented as absolute truths. They're evolving insights from one person's lived experience.
Exactly. And that's precisely their power, I think, their honesty and their wisdom.
So as you reflect on your own experiences with resistance, maybe that subtle unease before a big decision, or perhaps an outright external challenge you're facing, Jins, consider this. What if the discomfort you feel isn't just a barrier? What if it's actually a profound invitation? An invitation to connect more deeply with your authentic self and maybe discover a clearer, more aligned path forward? What might Counterforce truly be trying to tell you about your deepest intentions? Something to reflect on.